The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco and across the moat from Oakland. I'm blessed to have some of the most interesting people on the planet as guests, and today is no exception. A returning guest to the Comfortably Zoned Network, councilperson from Hayward, California, right down the road from Alameda. And I'd like to reintroduce Sara Lamnin. How are you, Sara?
I am doing very well. Thank you so much for having me back. It's a delight again.
You seem to have a good time the first time, and that's what the name of the game is. And I think we challenged each other with your intellect. How about that? I had to live up to it.
Yeah.
It's Friday the 8th, and we have the Senate back as Democrats, and obviously that means that that Biden is at a tremendous advantage from what Obama had to go through. Why don't we address that first? Memories of how the Republicans handled the administration under Obama, and how many bills never came up, and how much problems he had, and compared to how it can be with Biden in the future.
Yeah, I think what could we accomplish, and how quickly could we accomplish something if everybody was sort of rowing in the same direction? And it doesn't mean that everybody agrees, of course. It just means that if there's sort of a unified, okay, we're not seeing each other as completely evil or the opposition, but individuals who have different opinions, but with a common goal of getting a COVID response on track, getting economic recovery on track. You know, I'm cautiously optimistic about what we could get done and what Biden can get done in the first, 100 days, first couple of years.
Okay, what with the Congress, the Senate back, what would be your apprehension? Why do you think he would have problems in accomplishing some of these things?
My only fear is that the division is not just red and blue. Unfortunately, there are deep divides in the Democratic Party as well. And, no group of individuals is uniform or homogenous, of course, and that's generally a good thing. But, I look at the vote for the Alameda County Democratic Party chair, and it was almost 50-50, 50-51. It took a couple votes to get a majority.
So basically it's the progressive side of the Democratic Party up against the conservative side. Am I correct?
Yeah, and I would even say there's sort of a perceived, right? The perceived progressive versus the perceived moderate or conservative, and the whole spectrum there. Yeah.
Okay. How did Trump's recent insurrection, let's call it that because it was, how does that change things, do you feel? Will it make it easier for the Republicans to meld with the Democrats, or will it make it more difficult?
It's a great question. I certainly hope so. I certainly hope that for the Republican side it was a wake-up call of this is the extreme. This is how some of the things that have been put forward by the party could be taken, and how they really can undermine our democracy. And I don't think a lot of Republicans wanted that to happen, but to see it in black and white or living color real time happening in our country under their watch. I'm hoping it was a wake-up call. Whether or not to let them come back in and sort of work with them as opposed to saying, see, you're those people. That won't help either.
Absolutely. You know, Sarah, long before this week of tension, when we spoke about you coming back on the show, I was concerned, and maybe you can help me identify what the COVID lockdown in California is all about, and what is being done about some of the non-essential businesses that remain open, almost flying in the face of state regulations with no teeth. Do you find that to be true?
So I remember that you mentioned that, and I haven't seen a ton of them, but I have no doubt that they're there. And the other day I walked by a place that was cutting hair because the guy knew he was supposed to be closed. A customer came to him and said, could I get a haircut? Was he going to turn down that business? They were both wearing masks. It wasn't, but is that okay? Is that not okay? Yeah. Yeah.
That's my question. And how are we going to deal with COVID unless there is a shutdown? Because there are enough people refusing to wear masks and talking about not becoming vaccinated, and there's a whole bunch of stories about that. How are we going to reach herd immunity unless there is a shutdown? And it has to be complete the way I see it.
Yeah, I do. I think you're right. I think we have to find a way to shut down for 3 weeks in a way that doesn't continue to put the same at-risk populations at risk, because we can't shut down the hospitals. We aren't going to shut down food access. So who is it that still gets to have access, to not have access, to be at risk, to not be at risk? Unfortunately, shutdown isn't super easy, but we should be looking at New Zealand. What did they do? What worked there? And buy into that. And then, of course, there's the vaccination place. Look, if you don't get a vaccination, you don't get to work in healthcare. You don't get to do some of the things you want to do. Because you're right, we have to get to herd immunity.
And I think that's going to take years, the way, given the response of people not wearing masks, these are the same people that are apt to turn down the vaccine for good reasons or bad reasons. I can appreciate having an argument, especially if you're a minority. They've seen what's been done in testing, and I'd be reluctant. However, I made a deal with myself that if Dr. Fauci says the vaccines are safe, I say the vaccines are safe. I'm going to go with medical science as opposed to how the current administration, not the outgoing one, or the outgoing administration, has handled it, denying science all the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is this question of where is the line between individual freedom and putting somebody else at risk? If I have questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just, that's a very good point. You may not want it, but if you're jeopardizing me, and I'm going to make this personal in a way. My partner works for a pit grooming in Oakland, and they are not essential, but nobody enforces a lockdown, and she can't simply not go to work because she wouldn't get unemployment insurance, to the best of my knowledge. So where do the individual cities come in regulating the COVID restrictions that this state put down?
Yeah, I think there is we want people to be compliant, we want things to work, and it becomes difficult when, right, unemployment insurance gets suspended, or somebody doesn't follow the eviction moratorium, or, the things that we don't know about until somebody says, hey, this thing that you've asked to have happen isn't happening in the way that you asked it. It's a city of 160,000 people. We can't know everything that's going on at every moment, and people probably don't want that much of a big brother in government.
How much do the decisions of the council people in not just Hayward but all over, how much of these decisions are based on the economy and trying to have these businesses open? And I can understand it, just to keep the economy going. But when at a council meeting, when you sit around, what percentage of the decisions are made simply by economic reasons as opposed to public safety?
Yeah, I would say it's 50-50 because the two are interlinked, right? If I'm going to, and there's the mental health component too, as well as the physical health component.
My mental health. Are you talking about my mental health?
Of course, and everybody else.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. How can people, when they are quarantined and they can't work and this and that, there is a definite effect on mental health. No question about that. And you have to factor that in. Tough being king, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah. Mel Brooks didn't have that right.
Okay. The only other thing that I wanted to touch bases with you about is what I originally broached when we talked. And I don't know if you've had much of a chance to look into, there was a city in Alaska. I might have sent you a link to it, that has decided that they can tax organized religion, and it has been an option for them. And I wonder if there's ever been a talk in Northern California, or your city in particular, about doing that, taxing religion, and especially property taxes and what have you. What is your initial thought on that?
Yeah, it's a really intriguing possibility. And I think my first thought is to look at it from a nonprofit standpoint. So whether it's a religious organization or any nonprofit, what is the return on the investment? Because basically what we're saying is, okay, nonprofit tax-exempt organization, whatever it is you do, whatever faith you follow, et cetera, we as a community are going to subsidize the cost of the things that property taxes pay for you to do what you do. And in some cases, I think perhaps we get a value on that return. Perhaps, if somebody's looking at children's services, food services, shelter services, the amount we would pay for that is probably, if we were paying for it directly, probably more than it costs in lost property taxes. But I think that's where the analysis has to start. What's the return on the investment?
Okay. Why the middleman? Why should organized religion be taxed and not, say, astrology?
Right. And that's kind of why I started with the nonprofit place, because religious organizations fall under that. And I don't want to judge. This church does great work, that temple doesn't do anything, do we, or vice versa? I don't want to put a judgment on the faith or the observance. I want to say,
basically, it isn't the small churches that we're talking about. It's the mega churches and the Catholic Church in particular, and synagogues and what have you as well, I'm sure. But basically speaking, they're given a business, an unaccountable business. That's not the word, but they get a free rein, and especially on the property taxes, I can't imagine that coming out as a plus for the individual municipalities. Just when I think of the property owned, for instance, in New York by the Catholic Church, it's mind-boggling, and it's just who's making up. The taxpayer is making up for that, and I think it's like double jeopardy. But
yeah, and I think that's where the evaluation of what's the return on the investment. I mean, is the Catholic Church, is it a church? Is it, a congregation?
Or is it a business? Yeah.
Is it a business, or is it affordable housing? Not all the properties are used for faith or fundraising or, income generation. Some are used for social service. Do we care? Yeah. Does it, is that worth the return on the investment? I mean, that's the sort of math I think we have to do, and the accountability, piece. What are you getting? What is the community getting for subsidizing that? And is it time that we maybe look at a sliding scale? If all you're doing is revenue generation, then you're a business and you get to pay full load taxes.
Well, let's introduce that at the next meeting of the Hayward Chamber of Commerce and see what they say.
Yeah, my interfaith colleagues may have some opinions about that.
Exactly. Exactly, and then you get down to the definition of what is faith and who are they faithful to. So
this is a good point.
Yeah. Sara, what's on your agenda in these next few weeks regarding Hayward, and what is the main thing going for you as a council person?
Yeah, so it's a couple things, as usual. So one is housing, of course, housing affordability, really looking at could we, as we have this economic downturn, are there ways to preserve affordable housing and not have it all go on the speculative market and have massive displacement once again? What are some mechanisms that we could do differently? What could we put in place? And then sort of allied to that what are some approaches that would get housing created quickly, for instance, for people who are homeless? And tiny homes have been piloted all over the place, and it's time that Hayward have some villages and maybe even some backyard ADUs that are managed by nonprofit partners. So there's a lot of detail to both of those things, but those are things I'm working on. And then the third one, of course, is policing reform.
Okay. In what ways did the idea of police reform become evident to you that it's needed?
Yeah. Really I guess since I got in office, I've been thinking about it and trying to understand how policing works. And had been aware of community concerns, but it really came very loudly when we had an officer-involved shooting in Hayward, where I was seeing events unfold in real time. Because up to then, I only had these things had happened or these things had been accused, and I was still trying to understand that. But to see it all unfold in real time and kind of make my own judgments about it have started me thinking about what are our expectations for police? What do we mean when we say public safety? What does prevention really look like? What does opportunity creation? What does equity? All of those concepts over the last couple of years. And then, of course, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of the energy that has happened this summer has allowed the political will to be available to really dig deeper and not just have things be status quo. It's not perfect yet, but there's more energy, more space to have those conversations productively than there used to be.
Well, this is a week for police reform because I'm going to cite the federal insurrection of the Capitol recently, and the police response to it. Now, there were a whole bunch of warnings and a whole bunch of this is riot. A whole bunch of people for weeks and weeks were predicting this, and the police response and readiness was horrible. Agreed that the police chief got fired, but were 2 or 3 weeks before this happened, it announced that the Black Lives Matter group was going to protest or take over the Capitol. What do you suppose would have been there in terms of police protection at that point?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I mean, there was the picture that people have been showing of the National Guard facing a sit-in, not even. And yeah, that had been after weeks of Black Lives Matter protests, but so much of that was peaceful. Why you would have National Guard out, and I think it is an absolutely valid question why you didn't have why National Guard wasn't there, especially because, it was public information. I went and looked up the rally website on Tuesday or Wednesday. Everybody knew they were coming to the Capitol. Everybody knew that what was going on inside the Capitol. Why you wouldn't have the National Guard protecting that space
in advance, right? Before they had to call them.
Yeah, why did they have to call them in? I agree with you completely. There's no reason for that. And it really does pull the racial relations and inequity into stark contrast. Absolutely.
Well, the one video that sticks out in my head, and this whole thing disgusted me more than you can imagine because I was raised by basically grandparents who were immigrants and had to take courses to get their citizenship, civics courses and what have you. For the first time since my grandparents have been deceased, I was almost happy that they were gone and didn't have to see what took place.
Yeah. I hear you.
I can't imagine my grandfather. That would have killed him again. He would have had to spin the other way in the grave. Been very confusing to the poor old guy. But you see what I mean? It's just, and the one tape I interrupted myself was some of the protesters, and I put that in quote, there was a mob, it wasn't a protest, it was a takeover. some of the protesters were seen intermingling with the cops, talking, here's a glass of water, this, that, and the other thing.
Let's take a selfie.
Yeah. Pardon?
Let's take a selfie.
Yeah, yes, exactly, of the occasion. And having these crazies sitting in sacred quarters, how did you feel when this was all going down? Were you absolutely terrified that this could be the end of democracy?
I was, at first, absolutely. What do you mean people are storming the Capitol? What is happening here? And then as I saw that it seemed like people were sort of let in and then were just milling about, I thought, okay, this isn't there isn't a plan. There was a plan to storm the Capitol that was facilitated, but a plan that actually made sure that the count didn't happen, that democracy was undermined, didn't happen, which I'm grateful for. I'm also grateful for the people who said, no, we are going to have the count, and the people who called the National Guard and the law enforcement who said, no, we're done with this. This is ridiculous. We're not doing this anymore. Those systems worked, maybe a little late, but they worked.
Right.
That I found, as a relief. But it is really clear that this stuff is possible, that we are not safe from revolution. And I think we're not safe from the trauma and violence that can happen from such misinformation. I mean, this is the stuff of tyranny. How do we counteract that? How do we not have that misinformation have such a power hold? I have no doubt.
How was it that X number of senators, after the count, after this, it had been decided by the Supreme Court, and how did so many senators get behind Trump on this recent going against the people's will? And they're still, to this moment, they're still behind him.
Yeah, why people? I don't have a great answer. Which I have a shared mystification that this misinformation has such a strong hold on people. I absolutely believe that some of the people who traveled from wherever they traveled to storm the Capitol and the senators who are standing behind Trump believe that our democracy is at risk. And somehow the truth that these actions are much greater risk to our democracy and the greatness of America or whatever than whatever they're holding on to, which is false. I don't know how we flip that switch, but fundamentally that seems to be a big driver in this.
Okay. How has your mindset been changed through all of this? How do you intend to be different or look at things differently from here on in? Because it's been 200 years since the Capitol has been attacked. We weren't prepared for that. We're always prepared for protest, and I think protest is excellent. You need protest, but we aren't prepared for rioters on our sacred ground, and I'm using that term in quotes because I can see both sides of how it wasn't sacred. The sacred ground wasn't sacred for the bulk of us. It was sacred for those who become millionaires by getting into politics. And the funny part is that most representatives do become millionaires in their term. Biden, for instance, started as he lives in mansions. He's got a lot of bucks. That isn't how politics was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Enriching oneself for the purpose of enriching oneself isn't what it's about. And how do you think we can get the money, separate the lobbyist money from politics? Is there a way to reform the system? Because it's clearly broken, or we wouldn't have been led to Trump being president. He wouldn't have had a chance. I mean, we all knew what he was about before he was elected, yet enough people thought that the previous administration failed for whatever reasons, in a myriad of ways to elect this guy. So I guess these are all rhetorical questions that we ask ourselves that really can't be answered. And it's frustration. When you see it so clearly, you see what's wrong so clearly, and good Americans are so polarized.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and we've not done enough in this country to deal with the things that Trump is able to speak to. Job loss, loss of industries, things like that. We haven't fixed that, regardless of who's in office. And then the other side is we haven't taken out sort of the power of money in politics, right? If legislators were only allowed very small amounts of money that they were allowed to spend on campaigns, if really what they had to do was show up at public events and meet people and knock on doors, maybe make phone calls, but that they weren't allowed to do massive advertising, what would that do to their campaign dollars and their coffers? They'd
have to prioritize them to reach the people in a manner that they're not bribing them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but you know what it is, Sarah? It's a privilege for me to banter with you and at least put the problems out there. We can't solve them all, but putting it out there is a good thing.
I agree. Where is that magic wand anyway? I think mine's in the shop.
Boy, I had a line, but I'm too much of a gentleman. I would say that at least you have one, and it's in the shop. I have no magic. So, hey, would you keep coming back on a regular basis so we can chat? It just makes me feel good, in a sense, to know I'm listened to. In some of my ideas are just not pie in the sky. I think this country can be made whole again in a hurry. So let's sweat out these next 2 weeks and see what the man is going to do. They reminded me on CNN this morning that he still has the nuclear codes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, how hard is that?
That's very scary. But they also said that, or Trump also said in a speech last night, that he is going to not be there. He accepted the fact that Biden is going to be president. And I think that should be warming to us all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll take it.
All right. Sarah, thank you again. I enjoy your being.
Likewise. It's really a privilege to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, the privilege is mine. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Sara Lamnin, councilperson from Hayward, California, Northern California. So if you're out there and you want to Google what's going on in California, at least we know there's a person in charge in Hayward that has a good brain.
Thank you.
And a good heart. That's most important.
Amen.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Sara, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all. Be well.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.